Aloha. My name is Lanny Sinkin. I'm here as a lay representative for the Temple of Lono. And with me is the kahuna of the Temple of Lono, Palani Nobriga. The Supreme Court invalidated the last permit because the Board of Land and Natural Resources violated the due process rights of the parties opposing the permit when the board voted to approve the permit before holding the contested case. The court found that the hearing officer selected to preside over the contested case could not be objective because the hearing officer would know that the agency had already voted to approve the application. What the court did not explain is how a new presiding officer would be any less improperly influenced. Any new hearing officer selected for a new contested case would also know that the agency voted in the past to approve the permit application. That improper influence could only be mitigated, not cured, by the most rigorous adherence to ensuring the rights of those opposed to the permit were protected. No objective party looking at this proceeding could possibly conclude that the rights of those opposed to the permit were protected, let alone protected vigorously. The Hawaiian language is an official language for the state of Hawaii proceedings. Native Hawaiians clearly have a major interest in the proposed project. Yet you hired a hearing officer who did not speak Hawaiian, had no expertise in the Hawaiian faith or religious practices, and questioned from the very beginning whether she had to consider the protections afforded to Native Hawaiians by Article 12, Section 7 of the Hawaiian Constitution, as if that constitutional provision was irrelevant. You hired a court reporter who did not speak Hawaiian. The hearing officer refused to arrange for a translator, and there's been no translator here today. Native Hawaiians were forced to abandon their language in order to be heard in this proceeding. So right from the beginning, Native Hawaiians were treated as second-class citizens in a manner symptomatic of a more general racially and religiously motivated discrimination. Also, right from the beginning, the university applicant demonstrated a profound hostility toward the traditional Hawaiian faith by filing a bigoted and libelous attack on the Temple of Lono, found in document 135 in the DLNR online documents library on pages 14 and 15. In response to this shocking attack, the temple sought to litigate whether the attack disqualified the university from receiving the permit. The temple sought to argue that the applicant's open hostility to the Hawaiian faith meant that the applicant could not be expected to fulfill its obligations under the state constitution and state statutes to respect and protect the faith. Absent that commitment, the state cannot approve the application for a state permit. The hearing officer blocked every attempt by the temple to litigate this issue, including refusing to let the temple subpoena the president of the university to testify about the university's attitude towards the traditional faith. The hearing officer revealed that the board had indeed picked a presiding officer who had prejudged the application's outcome, intended to recommend granting the permit application, and was not going to consider any challenge based on the traditional Hawaiian faith that was contrary to her predetermined decision. The constitutional error of not allowing a party to be heard is one of numerous such due process errors that occurred in this proceeding and are identified in the temple's findings of fact. In her proposed decision and order, the hearing officer did not address any of the due process errors identified by the temple or any other party. For further evidence of the institutional prejudice that guides this proceeding, we need look no further than the Office of Mauna Kea Management, or OMKM. The university applicant is attempting to have that office regulate Hawaiian religious practices on the sacred mauna. For example, you can review the cross-examination of Stephanie Nagata, executive director of the OMKM, by the temple, and the exhibits introduced through her testimony to find the regulatory plan. For example, the Temple of Lono's Exhibit L17 is a proposed OMKM regulation that, quote, setting guidelines for the culturally appropriate placement and removal of offerings. OMKM attempts to tell Hawaiian religious practitioners how long they can leave an offering on an altar. The OMKM has no understanding of the religious practice of making offerings, or OMKM would know that one form of offering is precisely an offering that is left to decay on an altar as a reminder of the cycle of life and death in this physical existence and the eternal nature of existence itself. Can you imagine how the Catholic Church would react to a state agency telling their priest how long Mass could be? No, you can't, because such an attempt by the government to regulate a religious practice would be so obviously unconstitutional that a state agency would never dare to propose such restrictions. Here, however, Native Hawaiians are second-class citizens, subject to the unconstitutional regulatory whims of a state agency. The executive director of OMKM does not practice the traditional Hawaiian faith, or any faith at all for that matter, as she testified. She apparently intends to rely upon Kahokumauna, a group of Native Hawaiians being asked to legitimize the illegal and unconstitutional restrictions that OMKM is pursuing. Yet Kahokumauna already stated that the Hawaiian religious practices are family-based, and that one family does not tell another family how to practice the religion. We will see whether Kahokumauna remains steadfast in their position and refuses to cooperate with OMKM's plan to violate the rights of Native Hawaiians, guaranteed under the United States Constitution's First and 14th Amendments and the Constitution of Hawaii's Article 12, Section 7. Then you have the astronomers. The NASA Keck Environmental Impact Statement concluded that the impacts of astronomy on the Mauna have been significant, adverse, and substantial. That cumulative impact should have been sufficient to say enough is enough. Instead, the same institution, Caltech, came back with another, even larger telescope project. So when is enough enough? The astronomer argument that the TMT will only have a small incremental adverse impact on the Mauna is basically an assertion that they have occupied and trashed so much of the Mauna that further destruction and visual intrusion will hardly be noticed. The Mauna protectors disagree. The protectors are not anti-TMT, they are not anti-astronomy, they are not anti-science. Spiritually, it would not matter if the project was TMT or a McDonald's. They are protecting a sacred site from further extensively documented desecration. The public information campaign orchestrated by the TMT proponents has attempted to portray the Native Hawaiian opposition to TMT as a clash between superstition and science. The traditional Hawaiian faith is a very scientific faith, based on hundreds of years of observing the natural world. For example, the hydrology of the Mauna is complex and little studied by the proponents of TMT. The hydrologic secrets of the Mauna are far better known by the Native Hawaiians than the astronomers. Opposition to putting an industrial project on the lands that capture water that supports human civilization on the islands is a common-sense, scientifically based position. Declaring the watershed sacred is a necessity for self-preservation. Please read the testimony of Star Priest Michael Lee, found as Exhibit D1 submitted by Hank Fergerstrom in the evidence section of the DLNR website. In his testimony and during cross-examination, Mr. Lee spoke of bringing in information from the stars into formations on the sacred mountain, formations that will be destroyed if TMT is built. Of course, the astronomers do not believe that a human can bring in information from the stars through a rock formation, because most astronomers apparently do not believe in anything they cannot be recognized by their five senses or measured by their instruments. The astronomers appear not to believe in spiritual experiences at all. If you do not believe it is possible to have a genuine spiritual experience, then you are highly unlikely to have such experiences. If you are open to having such experiences, then an abundance of such experiences will be available to you. To deny the validity of others' spiritual experiences is simply religious bigotry. To have Professor Learned, so-called Learned, at the University of Hawaii at Manoa refer to religious objections to the placement of TMT on Mauna Kea as, quote, nonsense, unquote, only confirms what is apparently a high level of antagonism against Hawaiian religious practices within the university community. The traditional faith practices of the Hawaiian people are recognized and protected both specifically by Article 12, Section 7 of the Constitution of Hawaii and generally by the state law that prohibits desecration. These provisions are being misapplied or ignored throughout the contested case proceeding. In the environmental impact statement listing of all the constitutional, statutory, and regulatory provisions applying to the TMT proposal, the proponents of the telescope left out the state desecration statute. That omission was not an oversight. The proposal before the Board of Land and Natural Resources is an application for a permit to desecrate a site held sacred by the traditional Hawaiian faith. The proposal meets all the legal tests required to conclude that the university is applying for a permit that would lead to violating the desecration statute if implemented. The application should have been dismissed by the board when the application was submitted. The hearing officer refused to schedule a briefing on the desecration issue, despite the temple filing a motion to dismiss based on that issue. That motion to dismiss challenged the jurisdiction of the agency. If the application is for a permit to violate the law, the agency lacks the jurisdiction to grant such a permit. A motion challenging the agency's jurisdiction should have been taken up before conducting any further proceeding, not simply ignored as the hearing officer did in this case. When she finally addressed the issue in her proposed decision and order, she simply cut and pasted whatever the university had to say about that issue. That dismissive approach to a critical question is further proof that the hearing officer was simply looking for ways to dismiss Native Hawaiian concerns. On October 11, 2016, the temple filed a motion to recuse the hearing officer. Again, the hearing officer simply ignored the motion, even though the motion was a fundamental challenge to the continuation of the proceeding. Only after the hearings were over did she deny the motion. By that time, she could hardly grant the motion because to do so would mean the entire proceeding was invalid. The Supreme Court could not have been more explicit about the need to observe the rules on due process. The numerous violations of the protector's due process rights in the current proceeding ignored that clear warning. The temple believes that the proponents of the TMT who have been paying attention to this proceeding know that the permit is going to ultimately be denied. The problem is no one wants to be the one to pull the plug, so it appears we will have to go through the whole litigation process. Although there is the possibility that the April deadline that TMT set for pursuing construction will come before there's a final court order in the case, perhaps leading the TMT proponents to use that deadline as a reason for moving to the Canary Islands. What if billions of timelines passing through each single point in the time-space continuum, and we're just on one of those timelines? Each second, we make choices that determine which line we are on. So the question is, which timeline will be chosen by Susan Case, Stanley Rohrig, Keith Downing, James Gomes, Thomas Oy, Samuel Ohugon, and Christopher Ewan? Will you choose the timeline on which you do the right thing by dismissing or denying the application? Will you choose what is Pono, or continue the lawless behavior begun when the kingdom was overthrown? Thank you for coming onto this planet at this time to play the role you've agreed to perform. This proceeding has served a major purpose of documenting the continuing racial and religious prejudice that Native Hawaiians face on a daily basis. Through the steadfast efforts of the opposing parties, the proceeding has also served to reveal the beauty and depth of the Hawaiian religious practices, validated the traditional practitioners, and left behind on Naleo an advanced course for anyone who cares to learn. The kahuna of the Temple of Lono has some closing thoughts.
Aloha. First of all, a correction. I did not say that we have the right to practice. What I said in that to you, Mr. Ying, was that we do not have the right to practice freely. That was my answer. And I am, again, a correction, I am not a kahu. A kahu is reserved to someone with the Hawaiian Christian background. I am a kahuna. That's a big difference. In the issue that came about to the Temple of Lono was, do you, Palani, as a keeper of the faith of the Temple of Lono, do you recognize, do you agree that someone else can tell you how to put a kuahu up, what to put on that kuahu, and how long that whole kupu stands on that kuahu? No. Why is the temple stepping in? Because in every temple in this state, there is an anu'u, a 3-level tier. The first level, the valley. The second level, the mountain. Okay, the third level is that highest part of Lono. It says, O Lono of the air, not the earth. The color of the symbol of Lono is white, like the snow. O Lono of the air, you speak in many ways. Soft and wild, you sound through birds and trees. Your reverent music rings to waterfalls. Let us hear you. Let us see you, so that our source is as real as ourselves. That mountain is the symbol of the triangle. In our culture, there is only observation, 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 and 3 symbols: the square, the pa halau o te atua, the foundation of the gods. The first god, ocean, he tu, a tea te tai o tu. O ocean god, you give life, you take life. That is the first lesson of every child, to understand that we live in the world of life and death. The second is the sun. He taniroa. Love vili o. Hate that sun. Rising of the clouds. Where does it rise? The top of the mountain. Lono. Lono, the third god. He rono, he ulu tamea ai o te pohe honua. You, the god of earth, must provide the staff of life for the world. Not for Hawaiians, for the world. You cannot do that by condemning the top of the mountain where the last god stands, Tani, fresh water. He tani, tahi dawai te tuahi. He luli, ika apo, atu, akea te tai o tu. I end in the first chant of the ocean. The tears of heaven are alive on earth. It carves into the stone. Heruri means it meanders back to the sea, creating the circle, the second symbol of our culture. There is no written language, folks. Observation and those three symbols. The pahalawati, those four gods. Why our temples are square? So did we lose our faith? No. So long as that temple is square and we have the molelo of that faith, then it is true. What we are facing here is prejudices, okay, racism, and the civil rights issue.
Thank you.
That's the temple Lono stand on.
I'd like to remind people two things. You're here to testify to the board. If you want to be sure to be understood, and if you want to be sure that your testimony is going to get correctly recorded, please face here so that our board members can understand and the court reporter can understand. Also, if you have testified in Hawaiian language and you wish to make sure that the translation is in the record, you're free to submit your translation following the proceeding. Thank you.